The sound of hoofbeats thundering through the London streets at midnight should have been enough to wake half the city, but Isabel Hartwood no longer cared about propriety or scandal. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself deeper into the shadows of the alleyway, her wedding dress, the symbol of her impending imprisonment, torn and muddied from her desperate flight through the dark streets. Behind her, she could hear them coming. The angry shouts of her father, the cruel laughter of Lord Blackthorne, the man who had purchased her like livestock with his title and gold. They were hunting her like a fox, and she was running out of places to hide. "Find her!" Her father's voice echoed off the narrow brick walls, filled with a rage that made her blood run cold. She cannot have gone far in that dress. Check every doorway, every shadow. Isabel closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing, but panic clawed at her throat like a living thing. At 22, she had spent her entire life being molded into the perfect commodity, beautiful, accomplished, obedient. Tonight was supposed to be her wedding night, the culmination of months of negotiations between her father and the man who would own her completely once the vows were spoken. But she had seen the truth in Lord Blackthorne's eyes during their final meeting, had seen the cold calculation, the barely restrained violence, the promise of a life where her spirit would be systematically broken until nothing remained but a hollow shell wearing her face. So she had run. The plan had been desperate and poorly conceived. Slip away during the wedding feast, steal a horse from the stables, and ride hard for the coast where she might find passage to France. She had saved every penny of her pin money for months, sewn the coins into the lining of her cloak, and practiced riding astride in secret when the household slept. But the horse had thrown her barely a mile from her father's estate, spooked by a cat that darted across the road. She had been forced to continue on foot, stumbling through the darkness in her elaborate wedding gown, the heavy silk and intricate beadwork that had cost a fortune, now serving only to mark her as prey. "She's here somewhere," came Lord Blackthorne's voice, closer now, filled with the kind of cold fury that promised retribution beyond her worst nightmares. "The little fool thinks she can escape her obligations. When I find her, she'll learn the price of defying me." Isabel pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. She had known this was likely a futile gesture, that a woman alone had little chance of escaping the web of male authority that surrounded her. But the alternative, a lifetime of subjugation to a man who looked at her like she was a prize horse to be broken, had been unthinkable. The alleyway where she hid was narrow and rank, with the smell of refuse, trapped between two towering buildings that blocked out most of the moonlight. At the far end, she could see the faint glow of a street lamp, but reaching it would mean exposing herself to view. Behind her, the sounds of the search were growing closer. She was trapped. "Check that alley," her father commanded, his voice sharp with desperation. Sir Edmund Hartwood was a man who had built his fortune on careful calculations and strategic marriages. His daughter's rebellion threatened not only his financial arrangements with Lord Blackthorne, but his reputation as a man who could control his own household. Footsteps echoed off the cobblestones, growing louder with each passing second. Isabel looked around frantically for another escape route, but the alley was a dead end, the walls too high to climb, the shadows too shallow to provide adequate concealment. This was it then. Her brief taste of freedom was over. She closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for what was coming. Lord Blackthorne would not be gentle in his punishment for this humiliation. Her father would likely lock her away until the wedding could be rearranged, if Blackthorne was still willing to proceed after this scandal. The footsteps were almost upon her now. She could see the flicker of torchlight beginning to penetrate the darkness of the alley. And then, impossibly, she heard the sound of a single horse approaching at a measured pace, its hoofbeats steady and unhurried in stark contrast to the frantic search happening around her. "What the devil?" Her father's voice cut off abruptly, replaced by a tone of surprise and sudden wariness. Isabel pressed herself further into the shadows and peered toward the mouth of the alley. A lone rider had appeared, mounted on a magnificent black stallion that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. The man himself was little more than a silhouette, tall and broad-shouldered, his face hidden beneath the brim of a dark hat. "Your Grace," her father's voice had changed completely, taking on the obsequious tone he used with his social superiors. "I had no idea you were in London. We are conducting a small family matter." "Are you indeed?" The rider's voice was deep and cultured, carrying an authority that seemed to fill the entire street. "And what manner of family matter requires hunting a young woman through the streets of London at midnight like a pack of hounds?" Isabel's breath caught in her throat. Whoever this man was, he had clearly witnessed enough to understand the nature of the pursuit. But would he intervene, or simply ride on after satisfying his curiosity? "Your Grace, my daughter has taken leave of her senses." her father said, his voice tight with embarrassment. She fled her own wedding in a fit of hysteria. We are simply trying to ensure her safety and return her to her proper place. Her proper place? There was something dangerous in the rider's tone now, a quiet menace that made even Lord Blackthorne step back. And where precisely would that be? With her husband, naturally, Lord Blackthorne interjected, his own voice carrying the arrogance of a man accustomed to getting his way. I am Lord Blackthorne, and the girl is my lawfully betrothed bride. This is a private family matter, Your Grace, and I must ask you not to interfere. The rider was silent for a long moment, and Isabel could feel the tension in the air growing thick as fog. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but carried the weight of absolute authority. Lord Blackthorne, yes, I know of you. Your reputation precedes you, and it is not a pleasant one. I beg your pardon. Tell me, Blackthorne, how many wives have you buried? 3, 4, I confess I lose count. The words fell like stones into a still pond, sending ripples of shock through the assembled men. Isabel's eyes widened as she realized the implication. Lord Blackthorne was not merely cruel, but potentially deadly. How dare you? Blackthorne began, his voice rising with outrage. I dare because I am Rowan Ashcombe, Duke of Ravenshollow, and I have seen enough of your handiwork to know that any woman who flees your embrace shows remarkable good sense. The name hit Isabel like a physical blow. The Duke of Ravenshollow was a legend, a man who had inherited his title at 16 and spent the subsequent years building a reputation for both ruthless efficiency and unwavering honor. He was said to be one of the most powerful men in England, answerable to no one save the crown itself. Your Grace, her father's voice was now openly pleading, surely you understand that a father has the right to control his daughter's marriage. The contracts have been signed, the arrangements made, and the bride? Was she consulted in these arrangements? The question hung in the air, unanswered and damning. Isabel felt tears prick at her eyes as she realized that this stranger, this duke she had never met, understood something that her own father had refused to acknowledge, that she was a person with her own will, not merely property to be transferred. The girl is hysterical, Blackthorne said dismissively. Women often suffer from nerves before their wedding. Once she is properly settled, she will come to appreciate the security and protection I offer. Security and protection? The Duke's voice was now openly mocking. Is that what you call the bruises your previous wives bore? The fear in their eyes? The convenient accidents that befell them? You go too far! Blackthorne's voice cracked like a whip, but there was something desperate in it now. I will not stand here and be insulted by— You will stand exactly where you are, the Duke said quietly, and you will listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. He urged his horse forward a few steps, and even from her hiding place, Isabel could feel the power radiating from him like heat from a forge. The young lady you are hunting has clearly expressed her unwillingness to proceed with this marriage. In my experience, when a woman is desperate enough to flee into the night, rather than speak her vows, she has excellent reasons for doing so. Your Grace, with respect, this is not your concern, her father began. It became my concern the moment I witnessed a pack of men hunting a terrified woman through the streets like an animal. The Duke's voice cut through the night air like a blade. Now, I suggest you gentlemen return to your homes and consider whether forcing an unwilling woman into marriage is truly the legacy you wish to leave. And if we refuse? Blackthorne's voice was filled with barely controlled rage. The Duke was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Then you will discover that my influence extends far beyond what you might imagine, and my memory for those who displease me is remarkably long. The threat was delivered so quietly, so matter-of-factly, that it was more terrifying than any shouted challenge could have been. Isabel watched as the men shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing that they had encountered a force far beyond their ability to control or intimidate. This is not over, Blackthorne said finally, his voice thick with frustrated fury. The girl belongs to me by right of contract and law. I will not be denied what is mine. The girl belongs to herself, the Duke replied with finality. And I suggest you remember that before you make any further attempts to claim her. Isabel heard the sound of footsteps retreating, accompanied by her father's urgent whispers and Blackthorne's muttered curses. But she remained frozen in the shadows, hardly daring to believe that her pursuers had actually given up the chase. The Duke remained motionless on his horse for several long minutes after the other men had disappeared, as if ensuring they were truly gone. Then, to Isabel's amazement, he turned his attention directly to her hiding place. You can come out now, he said quietly, his voice carrying easily through the still night air. They are gone. Isabel pressed herself further into the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. How had he known where she was? And more importantly, what did he intend to do with her now that he had driven off her pursuers? "I know you are there," the Duke continued, his tone patient but firm. "And I know you are frightened, but I give you my word that I mean you no harm." Still, Isabel hesitated. She had learned the hard way that a man's word was often worth less than the breath used to speak it. But what choice did she have? She could hardly remain hidden in this alley forever, and if the Duke had wanted to harm her, he could have simply revealed her location to her pursuers. Slowly, carefully, she stepped out of the shadows and into the pale moonlight. She was acutely aware of how she must look, her elaborate wedding dress torn and muddied, her carefully arranged hair falling in tangled waves around her shoulders, her face streaked with tears and dirt. The Duke studied her for a long moment, and she found herself looking up into a face that was both aristocratic and surprisingly kind. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience and understanding. There was strength in his features, but also a gentleness that made something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "Miss Hartwood, I presume," he said, inclining his head in a gesture of respect that no one had shown her in months. "Your Grace," she managed, attempting a curtsy despite the ruined state of her dress. I don't know how to thank you for what you just did. No thanks are necessary. Any decent man would have done the same." He paused, studying her face in the moonlight. "Though I suspect you have encountered precious few decent men of late." Isabel felt tears prick at her eyes again at his unexpected understanding. "Your Grace, I know how this must look. A woman fleeing her own wedding, causing scandal and embarrassment to her family. But I could not go through with it. Because you knew what manner of man Lord Blackthorne truly is?" She nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "Then you showed remarkable wisdom in fleeing. But tell me, what is your plan now? Where will you go?" The question hung in the air between them, highlighting the desperate nature of her situation. Isabel looked down at her hands, which were shaking despite her efforts to control them. I had hoped to reach the coast, to find passage to France, perhaps. I have some money saved, and I thought—" Her voice trailed off as she realized how foolish her plan sounded when spoken aloud. A young woman traveling alone, with no protection and no connections. "Miss Hartwood, I fear you would not make it 10 miles before falling prey to those who would see you as easy quarry." The words were harsh but true, and Isabel felt the last of her hope crumble away. She had known her plan was desperate, but hearing it dismissed so matter-of-factly made her realize just how truly trapped she was. "Then what am I to do?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I cannot return home. My father will simply arrange another marriage, perhaps to someone even worse than Lord Blackthorne. And I have nowhere else to go. No one who would take me in without demanding explanations I cannot give." The Duke was silent for a long moment, and Isabel could feel him weighing her words, considering her situation with the same careful attention he might give to a complex political problem. Finally, he spoke, and his words would change the course of her life forever. "Mount the horse." Isabel looked up at him in confusion. "I beg your pardon?" "Mount the horse," he repeated, extending his hand toward her. "I am offering you a choice, Miss Hartwood. You can return to your father's house and accept whatever fate he has planned for you, or you can come with me and discover what freedom might look like." Isabel stared at his outstretched hand, as if it were a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. "Your Grace, I don't understand. Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know that you had the courage to flee, rather than submit to a marriage that would have destroyed you. I know that you value your freedom more than security or social approval. And I know that any woman brave enough to run into the night in a wedding dress deserves better than to be hunted like prey. But where would we go? What would people say? We would go wherever you choose. And as for what people say," he smiled, and the expression transformed his austere features with unexpected warmth. "Miss Hartwood, when you have spent as many years as I have being the subject of society's gossip, you learn that their opinions matter far less than your own peace of mind." Isabel looked at his hand, then up at his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. But all she saw was genuine concern and an offer of help from someone who had no obligation to provide it. The choice before her was simple but terrifying: return to captivity or leap into the unknown with a man she had just met. But as she thought of Lord Blackthorne's cold eyes and her father's calculating smile, the decision became clear. Without another word, she reached up and grasped the Duke's hand, allowing him to pull her up onto the horse behind him. "Hold tight," he said quietly. and she wrapped her arms around his waist as he urged the stallion forward into the night. As they rode through the empty streets of London, Isabel felt the wind whipping through her hair and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves carrying her away from everything she had ever known. Behind them lay the ruins of her old life, the expectations, the obligations, the carefully laid plans that had never included her own desires. Ahead lay uncertainty, scandal, and the terrifying possibility of freedom. For the first time in her life, Isabel Hartwood was choosing her own path, and the exhilaration of that choice was almost overwhelming. She had no idea where the Duke was taking her, no understanding of what he expected in return for his help, no plan for what would come next. But as the lights of London faded behind them and the open road stretched ahead, Isabel realized that for the first time in years, she was not afraid. She was free. The sanctuary. The ride through the night passed in a blur of moonlit countryside and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats on packed earth. Isabel clung to the Duke's broad back, her torn wedding dress streaming behind them like a banner of rebellion, her heart still racing with the audacity of what she had done. She had left everything, her family, her home, her entire life, to ride into the darkness with a man she knew only by reputation. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt a wild exhilaration, as though she had finally awakened from a long, suffocating dream. "Where are we going?" she called over the wind, her voice barely audible above the thunder of hooves. "Somewhere safe," Rowan replied without turning around. "Somewhere you can rest and decide what you truly want from your life." As dawn began to break over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, they finally slowed their pace. Ahead, Isabel could see the outline of a substantial estate nestled in a valley between rolling hills. The house was built of warm golden stone, with ivy climbing its walls and smoke rising from several chimneys, suggesting a household already awake and active, despite the early hour. "Ravenshollow," Rowan said as they approached the gates. "My principal seat. You will be safe here." Isabel felt a flutter of nervousness as they rode up the long drive. The house was magnificent, far grander than her father's modest estate, and she was suddenly acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the scandal of her situation. "Your Grace," she said hesitantly, "perhaps this is not wise. Your reputation will suffer if it becomes known that you have brought an unmarried woman to your home." "My reputation has survived far worse scandals than this," Rowan replied, with what sounded like amusement. "Besides, you will not be staying in the main house. I have a cottage on the grounds where my aunt lives, Lady Penelope Ashcombe. She is a formidable woman who will serve as an excellent chaperone and, I suspect, a valuable ally." As if summoned by his words, the front door of the main house opened, and a small, elegant woman emerged, her silver hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour. She was perhaps 60 years old, with sharp blue eyes and the kind of bearing that spoke of a lifetime of command. "Rowan," she called, her voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "What on earth are you doing arriving at this ungodly hour, and who is that with you?" Rowan dismounted and then helped Isabel down from the horse, his hand steady and reassuring as she found her footing on unsteady legs. She was acutely aware of Lady Penelope's sharp gaze, taking in every detail of her appearance, the torn wedding dress, the tangled hair, the obvious signs of her flight through the night. "Aunt Penelope," Rowan said with obvious affection, "may I present Miss Isabel Hartwood? Miss Hartwood, my aunt, Lady Penelope Ashcombe." Lady Penelope's eyebrows rose as she took in Isabel's appearance, but her expression remained carefully neutral. "Miss Hartwood, how interesting. And might I inquire as to the circumstances that have brought you to Ravenshollow in such a state?" "Miss Hartwood was fleeing an unwanted marriage," Rowan said simply. "I encountered her in London and offered assistance." "Ah." Lady Penelope's expression softened slightly. "And the gentleman in question was—" "Lord Blackthorne," Rowan said, and Isabel saw Lady Penelope's face go pale. "Good God," the older woman breathed. "Child, you showed remarkable wisdom in fleeing. That man is a monster." She moved forward and took Isabel's hands in her own, her touch warm and surprisingly comforting. "My dear, you are safe now. Come, let us get you cleaned up and fed, and then you can tell me everything. Lady Penelope, I don't know how to thank you for your kindness. I know my presence here must be highly irregular." "Nonsense," Lady Penelope said briskly. "Any woman with the courage to flee Blackthorne deserves all the help we can provide. Besides, I have been rattling around in that cottage by myself for months. I shall enjoy the company." As Lady Penelope led her toward a charming stone cottage nestled among the gardens, Isabel felt tears of relief and gratitude threatening to overflow. After months of feeling trapped and helpless, she had found sanctuary with people who not only understood her situation, but were willing to help without judgment. "Miss Hartwood," Rowan called after her, and she turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Rest today. Tomorrow, we will discuss your options and decide how best to proceed." "Your Grace," Isabel said, her voice thick with emotion, "I will never be able to repay your kindness." "No repayment is necessary," he replied. "Your freedom is payment enough." The cottage was everything Isabel could have hoped for. Small but comfortable, with cheerful yellow walls and windows that looked out over the estate's gardens. Lady Penelope immediately set about making her feel welcome, ordering hot water for a bath and sending servants to fetch clean clothes. "Now then," Lady Penelope said, once Isabel had been bathed and dressed in a simple but well-made gown, "tell me everything. How did you come to be engaged to that dreadful man?" Sitting in the cottage's cozy parlour with a cup of tea warming her hands, Isabel found herself telling the story she had never been able to share with anyone. She spoke of her father's gambling debts, of Lord Blackthorn's offer to settle them in exchange for her hand, of the months of dread as the wedding approached. "I tried to be obedient," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to accept that this was my duty, my fate. But then I learned more about Lord Blackthorn's previous wives, about the accidents that befell them. And I realized that marrying him would not just mean the death of my freedom, it might mean my actual death." Lady Penelope's face had grown increasingly grim as Isabel spoke. "My dear child, you were absolutely right to flee. Blackthorn is a predator who has escaped justice far too long. The fact that your father would even consider such a match," she shook her head in disgust. "But what am I to do now?" Isabel asked, voicing the question that had been haunting her since the moment she had climbed onto the Duke's horse. "I cannot return home. My father will never forgive this humiliation, and he will simply arrange another marriage, perhaps to someone even worse. But I have no means of supporting myself, no skills that would allow me to earn a living." "Nonsense," Lady Penelope said briskly. "You are intelligent, well-educated, and clearly possess considerable courage. There are options available to you, though they may require some creativity." "What do you mean?" "Well, you could become a governess or companion to a respectable family. With the right references, such a position would provide you with security and independence. Or perhaps you have other talents, writing, music, art, that could be developed into a means of support." Isabel considered this, feeling a spark of hope for the first time since her flight. "I do enjoy writing," she said slowly. "I have always kept journals, and I have written some stories, though nothing that has ever been published." "Excellent. There is quite a market for novels written by ladies these days. With some guidance, and perhaps a small investment in your education, you could potentially support yourself through your pen." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. To support herself through her own efforts, to be beholden to no one, it was a dream she had never dared to entertain. "But Lady Penelope, even if such a thing were possible, it would take time to establish myself, and in the meantime, I would be entirely dependent on your charity." "My dear child, after the life I have lived, I can assure you that helping a young woman escape an unwanted marriage is hardly charity. It is justice. Besides, I suspect my nephew has some ideas about your situation as well." "The Duke? But why would he concern himself with my future? He has already done more than enough by rescuing me." Lady Penelope gave her a knowing look. "My dear, Rowan does not make impulsive decisions. If he brought you here, it is because he sees something in you worth protecting and nurturing. Trust me, he has plans." That evening, as Isabel sat in the cottage garden watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, she reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she had been a trapped woman facing a future of certain misery. Now she was free, surrounded by people who not only understood her situation, but were actively working to help her build a new life. "Miss Hartwood?" She turned to find Rowan approaching through the garden paths, his tall figure silhouetted against the dying light. He had changed from his riding clothes into evening dress, and she was struck again by the quiet authority he carried, the sense of power held carefully in check. "Your Grace," she said, rising to curtsy. "I hope I am not intruding by sitting in your garden." "Not at all. In fact, I was hoping to speak with you. May I join you?" "Of course." He settled onto the bench beside her, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough that she could catch the faint scent of sandalwood and leather that seemed to cling to him. "I trust my aunt has made you comfortable." "More than comfortable. She has been extraordinarily kind. But Your Grace, I must ask, why are you helping me? You could have simply driven off my pursuers and left me to find my own way. Instead, you brought me to your home, involved your family in my troubles. I cannot understand what you hope to gain from such generosity." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost distant. Have you ever felt trapped, Miss Hartwood? Truly trapped, with no way out and no hope of escape? Yes, she said softly. Every day for the past 6 months. Then you understand why I could not simply ride away and leave you to face that fate alone. He turned to look at her, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. A depth of understanding that spoke of personal experience with desperation. Your Grace, forgive me for asking, but have you been trapped? You are a duke, one of the most powerful men in England. What could possibly... Power and freedom are not the same thing, Miss Hartwood. I inherited my title at 16, along with responsibilities and expectations that have shaped every decision I have made since. I have spent the last 15 years doing what was expected of me, marrying whom I was told to marry, supporting causes I was supposed to support, living a life that was mapped out for me before I was old enough to have opinions of my own. Isabel stared at him in surprise. You were married, for 5 years, to a woman chosen by my guardians for her bloodline and dowry. She was a lovely person, but we were strangers who happened to share a name and a house. She died 3 years ago in childbirth, along with our son. I am so sorry, Isabel said softly, her heart aching for the pain she heard in his voice. Thank you. But my point is this. When I saw you fleeing into the night rather than submit to a marriage that would destroy you, I saw courage I had never possessed. You chose freedom over security, uncertainty over a comfortable prison. That kind of bravery deserves to be rewarded, not punished. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Finally, Rowan spoke again. Miss Hartwood, I have a proposition for you, but before I make it, I want you to know that you are under no obligation to accept. You are free to choose your own path, whatever that might be. What kind of proposition? A marriage of convenience. A partnership that would give you the protection of my name and title while allowing you the freedom to pursue your own interests and ambitions. Isabel felt her heart stop. Your Grace, I don't understand. You barely know me. Why would you offer such a thing? Because I believe we could help each other. Society expects me to remarry, to produce an heir and continue the family line. But I have no desire for another arranged marriage, another relationship built on duty rather than choice. You, meanwhile, need protection and independence. As my Duchess, you would have both. But Your Grace, what would you gain from such an arrangement? Surely you could have your pick of any woman in England. I would gain a partner who chose to be there, rather than one who was forced into the role. I would gain the freedom to build a marriage based on mutual respect and shared goals, rather than obligation and expectation. Isabel's mind raced as she tried to process what he was offering. Marriage to a duke would solve all her immediate problems. She would be safe from her father and Lord Blackthorne, would have the resources to pursue her writing, would never again have to fear being forced into an unwanted union. But it would also mean binding herself to a man she had known for less than 2 days, entering into a relationship with no guarantee of affection or compatibility. Your Grace, this is an extraordinary offer, but I must ask, what would you expect from such a marriage? What would be my obligations as your wife? You would be expected to serve as my hostess for social occasions, to support my political and charitable endeavors when they align with your own beliefs, and to present a united front in public. Beyond that, you would be free to pursue your own interests, maintain your own friendships, and live your life as you see fit. And the more intimate aspects of marriage, Rowan's expression grew serious. That would be entirely your choice. I would never force my attentions on you or expect you to submit to anything that made you uncomfortable. If in time affection developed between us, then perhaps, but only if it was what you truly wanted. The honesty in his voice, the respect he was showing for her autonomy, was almost overwhelming. Here was a man offering her everything she had never dared to dream of: safety, freedom, respect, and the chance to build a life on her own terms. Your Grace, I need time to consider this. It is not a decision I can make lightly. Of course, take all the time you need. But Miss Hartwood, I want you to know that whatever you decide, you will always have a place here. My aunt has already declared her intention to keep you as a permanent guest, and I would be honored to serve as your guardian and protector in whatever capacity you require. As he rose to leave, Isabel felt a sudden urge to call him back, to accept his offer immediately. But she forced herself to remain silent. This decision would shape the rest of her life, and she owed it to herself to consider it carefully. Your Grace, he turned back to her, his expression patient and kind. Thank you, she said simply, for everything, for seeing me as a person worth saving. Miss Hartwood, he said softly, You were always worth saving. It simply took someone with the wisdom to recognize it. The decision. Isabel spent the next 3 days in a state of careful contemplation, walking the gardens of Ravenshollow and discussing her options with Lady Penelope. The older woman proved to be an invaluable source of wisdom and practical advice, having navigated the treacherous waters of society for more than 40 years. "My dear," Lady Penelope said, as they sat in the cottage parlour on the third morning, "I can see that you are torn about Rowan's proposal. Perhaps it would help if I shared some perspective about my nephew's character." "I would be grateful for any insights you can provide," Isabel replied, setting down her teacup. "I feel as though I am trying to make a decision about a man I barely know." "Rowan is one of the finest men I have ever known," Lady Penelope said without hesitation. "He inherited his title at a tragically young age when his parents were killed in a carriage accident. Suddenly he was responsible for vast estates, hundreds of tenants, and a seat in the House of Lords. Most young men would have crumbled under such pressure, but Rowan rose to meet it. He mentioned that his marriage was arranged by his guardians. Yes, and it nearly broke my heart to watch. Charlotte was a lovely girl, but she and Rowan were completely unsuited to each other. She wanted a husband who would shower her with attention and romance, while he was struggling to manage his responsibilities and learn how to be a duke. They were both miserable, though they tried their best to make it work. How tragic for both of them. Indeed. But here is what you must understand about Rowan. Despite his own unhappiness, he never once treated Charlotte with anything less than respect and kindness. He provided for her every comfort, supported her interests, and when she died, he mourned her genuinely. That tells you everything you need to know about his character. Isabel considered this, feeling some of her uncertainty begin to ease. "Lady Penelope, may I ask you something rather personal?" "Of course, my dear." "Were you ever married?" Lady Penelope's expression grew wistful. "Once, long ago. I was engaged to a wonderful man when I was your age, a second son with no fortune but a heart full of dreams. My father forbade the match and arranged a marriage to a wealthy earl instead." "What did you do?" "I was a coward," Lady Penelope said simply. "I submitted to my father's will and married the earl. He was not a cruel man, but neither was he kind. I spent 20 years as his wife, and when he died, I swore I would never again allow anyone to dictate my choices. I am sorry you had to endure that. Don't be sorry for me, my dear. Be wise for yourself. You have been given an opportunity that I never had, the chance to choose a marriage based on mutual respect and shared goals, rather than duty or desperation. Rowan is offering you a partnership, not ownership. That is extraordinarily rare." That afternoon, Isabel found herself walking in the estate's rose garden, trying to sort through her conflicting emotions. The rational part of her mind recognized that Rowan's proposal was the answer to all her problems, but her heart was more cautious, scarred by months of feeling like a commodity to be traded rather than a person to be valued. "You look troubled." She turned to find Rowan approaching along the garden path, his expression concerned. He had been scrupulously respectful of her need for space, appearing only at meals and maintaining a polite distance even then. "Your Grace, I was just thinking about my proposal, among other things. Your Grace, may I ask you something? Anything. What happens if you fall in love with someone else? What happens if I do? This arrangement you propose sounds ideal in theory, but people's feelings can change." Rowan was quiet for a moment, considering her question seriously. "If either of us were to develop feelings for someone else, we would discuss it honestly and decide how to proceed. I would never trap you in a loveless marriage, Isabel. If you found happiness elsewhere, I would not stand in your way. You would grant me a divorce? If that was what you truly wanted, yes, though I hope we might find a way to be happy together." His honesty was both reassuring and surprising. Most men would never consider releasing a wife from her vows, regardless of the circumstances. "Your Grace, I have another question, and I hope you will not think me impertinent for asking." "Ask away. Why me? You could have your choice of any unmarried woman in England. Why offer marriage to someone you found fleeing through the streets in a torn wedding dress?" Rowan smiled, and the expression transformed his serious features with unexpected warmth. "Because, Miss Hartwood, in all my years of moving through society, I have never met a woman who impressed me as much as you did in that alley. Your courage, your determination to choose freedom over security, these are qualities I admire above all others. But you barely know me. What if I prove to be selfish or shallow or—" "Isabel," he said gently, using her given name for the first time. "A person's character is revealed in moments of crisis. When faced with an impossible choice, you chose to risk everything rather than submit to something that would have destroyed your spirit. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Isabel felt tears prick at her eyes at his words. For months, she had been told that her reluctance to marry Lord Blackthorne was evidence of her selfishness and ingratitude. To hear someone recognize her flight as an act of courage rather than cowardice was almost overwhelming. "Rowan," she said softly, testing the sound of his name on her lips. "If I were to accept your proposal, what would our life together look like? I know you have outlined the practical arrangements, but what about the day-to-day reality? We would be partners in the truest sense. You would have your own apartments, your own schedule, your own interests. When we appeared together in public, we would present a united front, but in private, you would be free to live as you choose. I hope we might become friends, perhaps even more than friends in time, but there would be no pressure, no expectations beyond mutual respect and consideration. And children, only if and when you wanted them. I have already lost one child, Isabel. I would never risk putting you through something you were not ready for." The pain in his voice when he spoke of his lost son made her heart ache for him. Here was a man who had suffered his own losses, his own disappointments, yet was still willing to offer her the very thing she had been denied: choice. "Rowan, I think I would like to accept your proposal, but I have one condition." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "Name it. I want a proper courtship, not a long one, but I want us to spend time together, to learn about each other, to see if we might actually suit. I don't want to marry a stranger, even one as kind as you have been." Rowan's smile was brilliant. "Miss Hartwood, I can think of nothing I would enjoy more than courting you properly. Shall we say a month? That should give us time to know each other while not prolonging your uncertain situation indefinitely. A month sounds perfect. Then it is settled. We shall announce our engagement immediately. That will protect you from any further attempts by your father or Lord Blackthorne to reclaim you. And in 4 weeks' time, if we both still feel this is the right decision, we shall be married." As they walked back toward the house together, Isabel felt a sense of peace she had not experienced in months. She was still taking an enormous risk, still binding her future to a man she barely knew. But for the first time in her life, she was making a choice based on hope rather than fear. "Rowan." "Yes? Thank you for giving me a choice. I know it may seem like a small thing to you, but it means everything to me." "Isabel," he said seriously, "every person deserves the right to choose their own path. The fact that you have been denied that right for so long is a tragedy, not a privilege I am granting you." That evening, as they shared the news with Lady Penelope over dinner, Isabel felt as though she were finally awakening from a long nightmare. The older woman was delighted by the announcement, immediately beginning to plan the wedding and discussing the social implications of their union. "This will cause quite a stir in London," Lady Penelope said with obvious satisfaction. "The Duke of Ravenshollow marrying a woman who fled her own wedding will be the talk of every drawing room in England. Will that be a problem?" Isabel asked, suddenly worried about the scandal their marriage might cause. "My dear child," Lady Penelope laughed, "when you are a duchess, society will adjust their opinions to accommodate you, not the other way around. Besides, once they learn the truth about Lord Blackthorne, you will be seen as a heroine rather than a scandal." "What do you mean?" "Rowan has been quietly investigating Blackthorne's past for years," Lady Penelope explained. "He has evidence that the man has been systematically murdering his wives for their dowries. Your flight may have saved not only your own life, but potentially the lives of other women who might have fallen into his trap." Isabel felt a chill run down her spine at this confirmation of her worst fears. "He was truly planning to kill me?" "Almost certainly," Rowan said grimly. "Your father's debts were substantial, and your dowry would have cleared them nicely. Once Blackthorne had access to your inheritance, you would have become a liability rather than an asset." "My God," Isabel whispered, her hand trembling as she set down her wineglass. "My own father was willing to sell me to a murderer." "Your father is a weak man who prioritized his own comfort over your safety," Rowan said, his voice hard with anger. "But you are safe now, and I give you my word that no one will ever again have the power to treat you as property to be traded." As the evening drew to a close and they prepared to retire to their respective quarters, Rowan took Isabel's hand in his and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Tomorrow we begin our courtship properly," he said softly. "I intend to show you that marriage can be a partnership of equals, built on respect and genuine affection." "I look forward to it," Isabel replied, surprised by how much she meant it. As she prepared for bed that night, Isabel reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been a trapped woman, with no hope of escape. Now she was engaged to one of the most powerful men in England, a man who had offered her not just protection, but genuine partnership and respect. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in months, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. The courtship. The next morning brought the first day of what would prove to be the most unconventional courtship in recent memory. Rowan appeared at the cottage just after breakfast, dressed for riding and leading a gentle mare saddled for a lady. "I thought we might explore the estate together," he said, when Isabel emerged from the cottage. "If you are comfortable riding, that is." "I love to ride," Isabel said, her eyes lighting up at the prospect. "Though I confess I have not had much opportunity lately." "Then we shall remedy that immediately." As they rode through the rolling countryside surrounding Ravens Hollow, Rowan proved to be an excellent companion, knowledgeable about the land and its history, attentive to her comfort, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. "Tell me about your writing," he said, as they paused to rest the horses beside a babbling brook. "What sort of stories do you enjoy creating?" "Oh, nothing very sophisticated," Isabel said, suddenly self-conscious. "Just stories about people finding their way to happiness despite difficult circumstances. I suppose they are rather silly, really." "Not silly at all," Rowan said firmly. "The world has quite enough tragedy and despair. Stories that offer hope and the possibility of happiness serve a vital purpose. I would very much like to read some of your work, if you would be willing to share it." "You would truly want to read my stories?" "Very much. And if they are as good as I suspect they are, I would like to help you find a publisher. There is no reason why your talent should not be shared with the world." The idea that someone might actually value her writing enough to help her publish it was almost overwhelming. Isabel had always written for her own pleasure, never daring to imagine that her stories might have value to others. "Rowan, may I ask you something about your own interests? I know you have responsibilities as a duke, but what do you do for pleasure?" "I read voraciously, history, philosophy, poetry. I enjoy architecture and have been involved in designing several buildings on my various estates, and I have a passion for astronomy that my friends find rather eccentric." "Astronomy? How fascinating. I have always been curious about the stars, but never had anyone to teach me about them." "Then I shall have to remedy that as well. I have a telescope in the tower room of the main house. Perhaps one evening you would allow me to show you the wonders of the night sky." As they continued their ride, Isabel found herself relaxing in Rowan's company in a way she had never experienced with any man. He listened to her opinions without dismissing them, asked thoughtful questions about her interests, and shared his own thoughts with a candor that suggested he saw her as an intellectual equal. "Rowan," she said as they turned back toward the house, "may I tell you something that might sound strange?" "Of course. This is the first time in my life that I have felt truly seen by another person. Not as a daughter to be managed or a bride to be traded, but as myself. It is liberating." "Isabel," Rowan said softly, bringing his horse closer to hers, "you deserve to be seen and valued for exactly who you are. The fact that you have been denied that recognition is a failure of those around you, not a reflection of your worth." Over the following days, their courtship took on a rhythm that felt both natural and exciting. They rode together in the mornings, exploring different parts of the estate and discussing everything from literature to politics to their hopes for the future. In the afternoons, they often sat in the garden while Isabel wrote and Rowan attended to correspondence, comfortable in each other's presence, even in silence. "You have beautiful handwriting," Rowan observed one afternoon as he glanced over at her journal. "And you write with such intensity. What story has captured your imagination today?" "Actually, I was writing about us," Isabel admitted, her cheeks coloring slightly. "About how strange it is to discover that the person you thought was rescuing you was actually the one who needed rescuing himself." "What do you mean?" "You saved me from a life of misery, yes. But I think perhaps I am saving you from something as well. From loneliness, from the burden of carrying all your responsibilities alone, from the expectation that you must always be strong and never show vulnerability." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You see too much, Isabel. Yes, I have been lonely. Yes, I have felt the weight of always having to be the strong one, the one with answers and solutions. But I never hoped that someone might understand that burden and be willing to share it. That is what partnership means, is it not? Sharing both the joys and the burdens." "Yes," he said simply. "It is exactly what it means." Their evenings were spent in the cottage parlor with Lady Penelope, who regaled them with stories of her youth and offered gentle guidance on the social implications of their upcoming marriage. It was during one of these evenings that the first challenge to their happiness arrived in the form of an unexpected visitor. "Your Grace," the butler announced, his expression troubled, "Sir Edmund Hartwood is here to see you. He is most insistent." Isabel felt her blood turn to ice at the mention of her father's name. "He found me," she whispered, her face going pale. "He cannot take you," Rowan said firmly. rising from his chair. "You are under my protection now, and I will not allow anyone to harm you. But what if he demands that I return home? What if he claims legal authority over me? Then we shall inform him that you are engaged to be married, and therefore no longer under his authority," Lady Penelope said briskly. "A father's power over his daughter ends when she becomes betrothed to another man." "Isabel, you do not have to see him if you do not wish to," Rowan said gently. "I can speak with him alone and send him away." Isabel considered this, then squared her shoulders with determination. "No, I want to see him. I want to tell him myself that I will never again be subject to his authority or his poor judgment. But I would like you to be there with me if you are willing. Of course, we shall face him together." Sir Edmund Hartwood was waiting in the main drawing room of Ravenshollow, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He was a man of medium height and soft build, with the look of someone who had lived too well and worried too little about the consequences of his actions. "Isabel," he exclaimed when she entered the room with Rowan at her side. "Thank God I have found you. Do you have any idea of the scandal you have caused? Lord Blackthorne is furious, and I have had to endure the most humiliating—" "Sir Edmund," Rowan interrupted, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of his rank, "I believe you owe your daughter an apology before you say another word." "An apology? Your Grace, with respect, this is a family matter. My daughter has behaved abominably, and I am here to take her home where she can be properly disciplined for her actions." "Father," Isabel said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, "I will not be returning home with you. I am engaged to be married to His Grace, and I am no longer subject to your authority." Sir Edmund's face went from red to purple. "Engaged? To the Duke? This is preposterous. You are already contracted to Lord Blackthorne. You cannot simply—" "Actually, she can," Rowan said calmly. "A marriage contract requires the consent of both parties. Miss Hartwood has clearly withdrawn her consent, making the contract void." "But the money? Lord Blackthorne has already paid a substantial sum toward her dowry. If she does not marry him, I will be ruined." "Then perhaps you should have considered that before agreeing to sell your daughter to a known murderer," Rowan replied, his voice like ice. Sir Edmund's bluster faltered at the word murderer. "Your Grace, surely you do not believe such wild accusations." "I have evidence, Sir Edmund, substantial evidence of Lord Blackthorne's crimes. Evidence that I will be presenting to the authorities very soon. Your daughter's flight may have saved not only her own life, but potentially prevented future murders." The colour drained from Sir Edmund's face as the full implications of Rowan's words sank in. But if Blackthorne is arrested, the scandal will destroy me, and without the marriage settlement—" "Father," Isabel said, her voice filled with a mixture of pity and disgust, "you were willing to sacrifice my life for your gambling debts. You have no right to expect my sympathy now." "Isabel, please, you are my daughter. Surely you cannot abandon your family in our hour of need." "You abandoned me the moment you agreed to trade my life for your debts," Isabel replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I owe you nothing, Father. Nothing at all." "Sir Edmund," Rowan said, his tone final, "this conversation is over. Miss Hartwood has made her choice, and I support it completely. I suggest you leave now before I decide to have you removed from my property." Sir Edmund looked between his daughter and the Duke, clearly recognizing that he had lost this battle completely. "This is not over," he said weakly, but the threat carried no conviction. "Yes, it is," Isabel said firmly. "Goodbye, Father." After Sir Edmund had been escorted from the premises, Isabel found herself shaking with a mixture of relief and residual fear. Rowan immediately moved to her side, offering his arm for support. "Are you all right?" "I think so. It is strange. I thought I would feel sad about cutting ties with my father completely, but instead I feel free, as though a weight I did not even realize I was carrying has been lifted from my shoulders." "That is because you have finally claimed your own power," Rowan said softly. "You stood up to the man who tried to control you and told him that his authority over you was at an end. That takes tremendous courage. I could not have done it without you beside me." "Yes, you could have. The strength was always there, Isabel. I simply provided a safe space for you to find it." That evening, as they sat together in the garden watching the sunset, Isabel reflected on how much her life had changed in just 2 weeks. She had gone from being a trapped woman with no choices to someone who could face down her father and claim her own autonomy. "Rowan," she said softly, "I want you to know that even if we had never met, even if you had never offered me marriage, today would still have been worth celebrating. For the first time in my life, I stood up for myself and refused to be treated as property. That is a gift you gave me that goes far beyond protection or security." "The gift was mutual," Rowan replied, taking her hand in his. Watching you find your strength, seeing you claim your power, it has reminded me that I too have choices, that I do not have to accept a life of duty without joy, responsibility without companionship. So we have rescued each other then? It would seem so. And I can think of no better foundation for a marriage than mutual rescue and respect. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Isabel felt a sense of peace and anticipation she had never experienced before. In 2 weeks' time, she would become the Duchess of Ravenshollow, but more importantly, she would become the partner of a man who valued her mind, respected her choices, and supported her dreams. The girl who had fled into the night to escape an unwanted marriage was about to enter into a union built on everything she had never dared to hope for: freedom, respect, and the possibility of love. The wedding. The morning of Isabel's wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect spring weather that seemed designed for new beginnings. She woke in the cottage that had become her sanctuary, surrounded by the gentle sounds of birds singing and the distant laughter of servants preparing for the day's festivities. "Good morning, my dear," Lady Penelope said, entering with a breakfast tray and an expression of barely contained excitement. "How are you feeling on this momentous day?" "Nervous," Isabel admitted, accepting the cup of tea with grateful hands, "but excited as well. A month ago, I could never have imagined that I would be marrying a man I actually respect and admire, someone who sees me as a partner rather than property." "And love?" Lady Penelope asked gently. "Has affection grown between you and my nephew during your courtship?" Isabel felt her cheeks warm at the question. Over the past month, her feelings for Rowan had deepened from gratitude and respect into something much more profound. She had come to love his quiet strength, his thoughtful intelligence, his unwavering support for her dreams and ambitions. "Yes," she said softly, "I believe I do love him, but I am not certain he feels the same way about me." "My dear child," Lady Penelope laughed, "you are either very modest or very blind. That man looks at you as though you hung the moon and stars. I have never seen him so happy, so alive. Trust me, his feelings are every bit as deep as your own." The wedding ceremony was to be held in the small chapel on the Ravenshollow estate, with only a handful of close friends and family in attendance. Rowan had wanted to give Isabel the choice of a grand society wedding or an intimate affair, and she had chosen intimacy without hesitation. "I have spent enough of my life being on display," she had told him. "I want our wedding to be about us, about our commitment to each other, not about impressing society." As Lady Penelope helped her dress in the beautiful gown that had been created for the occasion, a confection of ivory silk and delicate lace that made her feel like a princess from one of her own stories, Isabel reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. "You look absolutely radiant," Lady Penelope said, stepping back to admire the finished result. "Rowan is going to be speechless when he sees you." The chapel was filled with early morning sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the stone floor. As Isabel walked down the aisle, alone by her own choice, symbolizing her independence and self-determination, she saw Rowan waiting for her at the altar. He was magnificent in his formal attire, but it was the expression on his face that took her breath away. Lady Penelope had been right. He was looking at her as though she were the most precious thing in the world, his dark eyes filled with love and wonder. "You are beautiful," he whispered as she reached his side, his voice thick with emotion. "As are you," she replied, meaning it completely. The ceremony itself was simple, but deeply moving. They had written their own vows, speaking words of partnership, respect, and love that brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. "I promise to honor your dreams as much as my own," Rowan said, his voice carrying clearly through the small chapel. "To support your independence while offering you the security of my love. To be your partner in all things, your equal in all decisions, and your champion in all endeavors." "I promise to share your burdens as well as your joys," Isabel replied, her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "To stand beside you as an equal, to challenge you when you need challenging, and to support you when you need support. To build with you a marriage based on choice rather than obligation, on love rather than duty." When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Rowan's kiss was gentle and reverent, full of promise for the future they would build together. The wedding breakfast was held in the garden of Ravenshollow, with tables set among the roses and a small orchestra playing softly in the background. It was everything Isabel had dreamed of, intimate, joyful, and focused on celebration rather than display. "Your Grace," one of the guests said, approaching Isabel with a warm smile. "I wanted to tell you how delighted I am by this match. The Duke has seemed like a different man these past weeks, happier, more relaxed. You have clearly been very good for him." He has been very good for me as well, Isabel replied, glancing across the garden to where Rowan was deep in conversation with several friends. I think we have rescued each other. As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to depart, Isabel found herself alone with Rowan in the garden, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. So, Your Grace, Rowan said with a smile, using her new title for the first time. How does it feel to be a duchess? It feels like freedom, Isabel replied without hesitation. Like possibility, like the beginning of a life I never dared to imagine. And how does it feel to be married to me? He asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Like coming home, she said softly, moving closer to him. Rowan, I need to tell you something. What is it? I love you. Not because you rescued me, not because you offered me security, but because of who you are. Because you saw me as a person worth saving when I had forgotten that myself. Because you gave me choices when the world wanted to deny them to me. Because you made me believe that I deserved happiness. Rowan's response was to pull her into his arms and kiss her with a passion that left no doubt about his own feelings. I love you too, Isabel, he said against her lips. More than I ever thought possible. You have brought light into my life, hope into my future, and joy into my heart. I promise to spend the rest of my life proving worthy of the gift you have given me. As they stood together in the garden of their new home, surrounded by the roses and the gathering twilight, Isabel reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. Just 2 months ago, she had been a desperate woman fleeing through the dark streets of London, certain that her life was over before it had truly begun. Now she was the Duchess of Ravenshollow, married to a man who loved and respected her, with a future full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. She would pursue her writing with Rowan's full support, perhaps even see her stories published. She would use her new position to help other women who found themselves trapped as she had been. Most importantly, she would build a marriage based on partnership and mutual respect. What are you thinking about? Rowan asked, following her gaze toward the horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear. About how sometimes the most desperate moments can lead to the most beautiful beginnings, Isabel replied, leaning into his embrace. About how 2 words, mount the horse, changed everything. Those were the easiest words I have ever spoken, Rowan said, his voice warm with love. Because from the moment I saw you in that alley, I knew you were worth saving. I just never imagined that in saving you, you would save me as well. As they walked hand in hand toward their new life together, Isabel knew that she had found something rarer than any fairy tale, a love built on choice rather than circumstance, on respect rather than obligation, on the recognition that 2 people could be stronger together than either could ever be alone. The woman who had fled a forced marriage had found her way to a union that would free them both to become the best versions of themselves, and in the years to come, their love story would be remembered not just as a romance, but as proof that courage, even in the darkest moments, could lead to the most extraordinary transformations. The girl who had mounted the horse in desperation had become a duchess through love, and her greatest adventure was just beginning. Did Isabel's